In a heartbreaking betrayal, how my son tried to take away my medical license, Dr. Elaine Miller, a dedicated and compassionate doctor, faces the ultimate betrayal from her own son Noah, who becomes a lawyer and participates in an investigation that threatens her career. As the investigation unfolds, Elaine is forced to confront the painful truth. Her son has been working against her. The emotional tension between them escalates, but through a journey of self-reflection, regret, and forgiveness, they ultimately find a path to healing. The story of betrayal, justice, and redemption shows that even the deepest wounds can be healed with love and time. If you enjoyed this powerful story of family, betrayal, and redemption, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more emotionally charged stories like this. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us bring more captivating content to you. The Foundation of Trust, Elaine's Early Years, a career built on compassion. Elaine Miller, a 52-year-old dedicated physician, had spent the better part of her life not only saving lives, but also shaping the lives of those around her. For years, her job had been both her passion and her purpose. With a quiet sense of pride, she would walk the hospital halls, greeted by friendly faces, nurses, staff, and patients alike. To them, she wasn't just Dr. Miller, she was a symbol of hope and healing. Elaine's life had been shaped by hardships. Born to a single mother in a modest neighborhood in Boston, she had been taught early on the value of hard work and perseverance. Her mother, who worked multiple jobs to support them both, instilled in her a sense of determination, resilience, and the importance of giving back to those who were less fortunate. Elaine often recounted how, as a child, she would sit by her mother's side, watching as she meticulously budgeted every penny, making sure they both had enough to survive. Yet, despite the challenges, her mother's unwavering belief in the power of education and compassion had fueled Elaine's ambition. Her journey to becoming a doctor wasn't easy. The years in medical school were grueling, especially for a young woman trying to prove herself in an industry still dominated by men. Yet, every obstacle seemed to make Elaine stronger. She graduated with honors and quickly established herself in her field, excelling as a general practitioner. But the path that Elaine had carved for herself wasn't just about personal achievement. It was about the difference she could make in people's lives. Her work was rooted in empathy. She always made time to listen to her patients, to truly hear their concerns and fears. It was her way of connecting, of offering not just treatment, but understanding. This, she believed, was what made her a great doctor, not the knowledge of medicine alone, but the compassion and humanity with which she approached each patient. Elaine as a mother. Raising Noah. At the age of 26, Elaine became a mother. Noah, her only child, was born under the most delicate of circumstances. The pregnancy had been high risk, and the delivery, an emergency C-section, left Elaine physically and emotionally drained. But when she looked into her newborn son's eyes, all that exhaustion faded into an overwhelming sense of love. She had always wanted to be a mother, and despite the sacrifices she would make, she was determined to raise Noah the best she could. Raising Noah as a single mother was never easy, but Elaine managed. She worked long hours in the hospital, often taking on double shifts to make ends meet, but no matter how tired she was, Noah was always her priority. Her motherly love was relentless. She was determined to give Noah everything she never had, a stable home, an education, and most importantly, a sense of security. Noah grew up in a house filled with love, but also with an unspoken pressure to succeed. Elaine had high expectations for her son, but they were never unrealistic or overwhelming. She simply wanted him to be kind, to be thoughtful, and to use the privileges he had been given to make the world a better place. From a young age, Noah showed great promise. He was intelligent, inquisitive, and charming, traits that earned him the affection of both his peers and his teachers. Elaine was proud of him, of course, but she also noticed something in Noah that she hadn't expected, a quiet ambition, a desire to make something of himself. While Elaine had hoped Noah would follow in her footsteps and become a doctor, Noah had his own vision for the future. He loved to read and had a particular fascination with law and justice. From a young age, he would read through case files, drawn to the sense of order and fairness that the law seemed to promise. Elaine, though initially hesitant, eventually accepted that Noah's future might not lie in medicine. She encouraged his intellectual pursuits, supporting him through law school, though she couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to have him by her side in the hospital. As time passed, their relationship remained strong, but the bond between mother and son began to change, subtly at first. Noah's ambition began to distance him from Elaine in small ways, spending more time on his studies, leaving less time for family dinners, and eventually, when Noah graduated from law school, moving into his own apartment. Noah's separation, a change in direction. At 28, Noah had grown into a confident young man, no longer the boy Elaine had raised, but someone with his own opinions, ideals, and dreams. He had achieved remarkable success for his age, landing a prestigious job at a law firm in the city. For Elaine, it was bittersweet. She was proud of Noah's accomplishments, but she missed the closeness they had shared. The house that had once been filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation was now quieter. Elaine found herself missing the small things, the way Noah would ask her about her day, the long talks they'd had about life, and the simple joy of seeing him at the dinner table. As Noah's career began to take off, Elaine focused more on her own work. She was still practicing medicine, but there was a sense of weariness in her now. She loved helping her patients, but the toll of the long hours and emotional exhaustion was beginning to take its toll on her health. The hospital she had once walked into with a sense of purpose now felt overwhelming. It was as though she was running on fumes, giving all she had to her patients, but receiving little in return. Still, she never complained. She had been taught to keep going, to never give up. She pushed herself harder each day, knowing that her work mattered, even if it left her feeling empty inside. The seed of doubt, a growing tension. Then one day, everything changed. It was the kind of phone call that comes in the middle of the night, the one you never expect but dread nonetheless. The voice on the other end of the line was from a fellow doctor, a colleague at the hospital. "Elaine, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but I think you need to hear it from someone you trust." Before Elaine could even ask what was going on, the phone line buzzed, and she heard the words that would change her life forever. "There's an investigation underway. They're questioning some of your practices." Elaine's heart sank. She didn't understand. She had always followed the rules. She had always put patient care above all else. What could she have possibly done wrong? And then it hit her. Noah. He was a successful lawyer now. He had made a name for himself in legal circles. Could he be involved in this somehow? Elaine tried to push away the thought. She trusted Noah. He had always been her rock, the one she could count on, the one who would never let her down. But that trust would soon be tested in the most painful way possible. The betrayal begins. The unexpected investigation. The investigation was like a storm cloud that appeared without warning, darkening Elaine's once bright and hopeful world. The calls, emails and messages flooded in, each more disturbing than the last. Elaine's colleagues, whom she had trusted and respected for years, now treated her with an air of suspicion. In the beginning, they were polite, offering words of comfort, but the unease in their voices was undeniable. Elaine had no idea where to turn. She had always been so sure of herself, her integrity, her commitment to her patients, her role as a healer. But now, those very qualities seemed to be in question. As the days passed, Elaine became obsessed with finding out who had initiated the investigation. Her mind raced, unable to fathom that someone she knew could have done this to her. Was it a mistake? Had she unknowingly violated some rule, some regulation? She tried to hold on to the hope that it was all a misunderstanding, but the weight of the evidence stacked against her was growing heavier by the hour. One evening, as Elaine sat at her kitchen table, flipping through piles of paperwork, the phone rang. It was Noah. "Mom," he said, his voice colder than usual. "I need to talk to you." Elaine's heart skipped a beat. She knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. She had always been able to read Noah, to sense when something was wrong. This wasn't the son she had raised. "I've heard about the investigation," he continued, his tone measured, yet distant, "and I want you to know that I'm doing everything I can to make sure this doesn't affect your career." Elaine was taken aback. "Noah, you're involved in this? How? Why?" She could hardly believe what she was hearing. The son she had raised with so much love and care, the boy who had looked up to her as his role model, was now speaking to her like a stranger. How could he possibly be involved in bringing down the one person who had always been there for him? "I'm not doing anything against you, Mom," Noah said, though his voice lacked the reassurance it once had. "But there are things I've found out, things I can't ignore." Elaine felt a sickening twist in her stomach. This wasn't the conversation she had imagined having with her son. She had always expected him to defend her, to stand by her side, but now he was on the other side. "What things? What are you talking about, Noah?" There was a long pause before Noah spoke again. "I can't go into details right now, but I promise you, I'm just doing my job. This is about protecting the integrity of the healthcare system. I'm sorry if that makes you feel uncomfortable." Elaine couldn't breathe. Her own son, the boy she had dedicated her life to, was now a part of the investigation that threatened to destroy everything she had worked for. The betrayal stung in ways she couldn't explain. "Is that all?" Elaine asked, her voice trembling. She didn't know whether she wanted to hear more or if she should hang up before the truth became too much to bear. "I'll call you later, Mom," Noah said quietly. "Just trust that I'm doing what's right." Elaine hung up the phone, the silence in the room feeling deafening. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Noah was not just investigating her. He was the one who had taken the first steps to tear down everything she had built. The wound in her heart deepened, and she struggled to understand how her own flesh and blood could turn against her so coldly. A mother's dilemma. Elaine spent the following weeks consumed by a whirlwind of emotions, anger, disbelief, and a deep sense of betrayal that she couldn't shake. Each time she went to work, she was met with knowing glances from her colleagues. Some were sympathetic, while others simply avoided eye contact. It was as if everyone knew something she didn't, and the weight of it all was suffocating. The hardest part wasn't the investigation itself. It was the realization that her own son was responsible for the accusations. Noah, the child she had poured her heart into, the one who had always looked up to her as a role model, was now the very person who might strip away her ability to practice medicine. Elaine spent hours in her office at the hospital, going over her case files, looking for any evidence that might exonerate her. She had always prided herself on being meticulous, on following every rule and guideline to the letter, but now it seemed as though the rules no longer mattered. She was being torn down by the very system she had devoted her life to. As she sat alone in her office, staring at the documents that could either save or ruin her, Elaine couldn't help but wonder, what had gone wrong? How had things come to this? Was it simply a matter of professional ethics, or was there something deeper at play? In the days that followed, Elaine reached out to some of her closest colleagues. She needed answers. She needed to know if there was any chance of salvaging her reputation. One by one, they told her the same thing. They had no idea what was going on, but the pressure from higher-ups was mounting. The investigation seemed relentless, and there were whispers that things were being manipulated from the top down. Confronting Noah. One afternoon, Elaine found herself standing outside Noah's apartment, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been wrestling with the idea of confronting him for days. She couldn't continue to live in this limbo, wondering whether her own son was her enemy or if she was simply a victim of circumstances. When Noah opened the door, he looked surprised to see her. He had been avoiding her calls and messages, but Elaine wasn't about to let him hide any longer. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice tight with emotion. Noah hesitated before stepping aside to let her in. As Elaine entered the apartment, she noticed the coldness in his demeanor. The warmth and affection that had once defined their relationship were gone, replaced by an uncomfortable distance. "I'm not here to fight," Elaine began, her voice shaking with suppressed anger. "I just want to understand. Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to destroy my career?" Noah ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. "Mom, it's not like that. I'm just doing my job." "Your job? You're investigating me," Elaine shot back, her eyes welling with tears. "Your own mother." "I'm not trying to hurt you," Noah replied, his voice tinged with frustration. "But I have a responsibility to the law, to the people I serve. If there's something wrong, I have to expose it." Elaine's heart shattered at his words. She had raised him to believe in justice, to do what was right, but now she realized his sense of justice had become a weapon aimed directly at her. "I've done nothing wrong, Noah," she said, her voice breaking. "I've dedicated my entire life to helping people. You've seen the way I work. How can you believe these lies?" Noah didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at her with a mixture of guilt and determination. "I don't want to hurt you, Mom, but this is bigger than us. This is about the system, about accountability." Elaine shook her head, her emotions spilling over. "Noah, this is about us. This is about a mother who loves her son and a son who has turned his back on her." The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. Neither of them knew what to say next. Elaine had hoped for understanding, for an acknowledgement of the love they had shared over the years. But instead, she was faced with a reality she couldn't have prepared for, the painful, heartbreaking truth that Noah was no longer the boy she had raised. A mother's dilemma. The investigation deepens. Elaine could feel the days slipping away, each one dragging her deeper into a nightmare she never imagined. The investigation was no longer just a distant shadow, it had become a part of her daily life. The phone calls, the emails, the constant questions from her colleagues and patients, it was overwhelming. It was as though her entire professional identity had been upended overnight. The woman who had once been so confident in her work, so sure of her ability to heal, was now struggling just to hold on. But it wasn't just the external pressure that weighed heavily on her. It was the internal turmoil. Elaine found herself questioning everything, every decision she had made, every patient she had treated. Had she missed something? Had she made a mistake? Some small misstep that was now being blown out of proportion? The thought of losing her medical license, of having everything she had worked for torn away, was unbearable. But what was even worse was the thought that it might be her own son who was behind it. Noah had tried to justify his actions to her, tried to explain that it wasn't personal, that it was about justice and integrity. But Elaine couldn't shake the feeling that he had abandoned her. She had dedicated her life to raising him, to teaching him right from wrong, to being there for him when he needed her. And now, in her most vulnerable moment, he was nowhere to be found. The pain was excruciating, but Elaine refused to let it break her. She had always prided herself on her resilience, and she was determined not to let this investigation define her. She would fight back, not just for her career, but for the truth. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong. She knew her heart was in the right place. But now, she needed to prove it to the world. Elaine began to dig into the investigation herself. She knew that if she was going to have any chance of clearing her name, she needed to understand exactly what was happening. Who was behind the accusations? What evidence were they using? And most importantly, why had Noah become involved? The growing tension with Noah. The weeks passed, and the tension between Elaine and Noah only intensified. Their conversations became strained, each one filled with unspoken resentment. Elaine had always prided herself on being open with Noah, on maintaining a close relationship with him, but now it seemed as though they were speaking different languages. Every time she tried to reach out, every time she tried to get him to see her side, he pulled further away. It was clear that Noah was conflicted. He didn't want to hurt her, but at the same time, he couldn't ignore the pressures of his job, the expectations placed on him. Elaine could see the toll it was taking on him. He was becoming more distant, more guarded, and the distance between them seemed to grow with each passing day. Elaine tried to reach him. She tried to appeal to the son she had raised, the son who had once looked up to her with admiration and love. But the more she pushed, the more he seemed to pull back. Every conversation ended in frustration, with neither of them getting what they needed. Elaine felt like she was losing him all over again, not just as her son, but as a person she could rely on. One evening, after another tense phone call, Elaine sat alone in her living room, staring at the empty space in front of her. She had no idea what to do anymore. Her heart was broken, but it wasn't just the investigation that hurt. It was the realization that her son, the one person she thought would always stand by her, had turned his back on her when she needed him most. The search for answers. Despite the emotional turmoil, Elaine refused to give up. She spent sleepless nights researching every aspect of the case, gathering evidence and talking to colleagues who might have insight into what was happening. She knew that the more she understood, the better chance she had of defending herself. Through her research, she discovered something chilling. The investigation wasn't just a random event. It was part of a larger movement, a campaign against a handful of prominent doctors who had been accused of unethical behavior. But there was something else. Elaine's name had been placed at the top of the list. Elaine's suspicions began to crystallize. She had always known that there were people in the medical field who resented her success, who might even have wanted to see her fall. But she had never imagined that Noah would be the one to expose her to these forces, to allow her to be part of a crusade that seemed more about personal vendettas than any real attempt to uncover wrongdoing. Elaine spent days poring over the documents she had gathered, comparing them to her own records, looking for any inconsistencies, any errors that might give her an edge. The process was grueling, but she refused to let it defeat her. She was a doctor, and she had spent years analyzing symptoms, diagnosing conditions, and finding solutions. This wasn't any different. She just needed to follow the evidence, step by step, and find the truth. As she dug deeper, she found some surprising developments. There were irregularities in the way the investigation was being handled, inconsistencies in the evidence that had been presented against her. It was clear that the case against her wasn't as strong as it appeared on the surface. In fact, it was beginning to look like a smear campaign, one that had been carefully orchestrated by her enemies. But there was something even more troubling. Elaine discovered that Noah had been involved in gathering some of the evidence that was being used against her. His name appeared in the reports, his signature on legal documents. He was part of the machine that was trying to tear her down. The confrontation. It wasn't until one late evening, after a particularly long day of research, that Elaine finally decided she could take no more. She had been holding her emotions in for so long, bottling up her anger, her fear, her frustration. But now it was time to face Noah. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that they could work through this on their own. She had to confront him once and for all and demand answers. Elaine called Noah and asked him to meet her in person. There was no longer any room for phone calls or half-hearted conversations. She needed him to hear the truth from her, to understand the pain she was in, and to acknowledge the destruction he had caused. When Noah arrived at her house, he looked tired, worn down by the pressure, but there was still that same coldness in his eyes, that same distance that had formed between them over the past few weeks. Elaine could see that he was torn, but she wasn't going to let him hide behind his job anymore. "Sit down," Elaine said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We need to talk." Noah hesitated, but eventually sat down across from her. He knew what was coming. Elaine wasn't going to let him off the hook this time. "You've been a part of this investigation, haven't you?" Elaine asked, her voice cold and measured. "You've been gathering evidence against me, haven't you?" Noah didn't respond immediately. He looked down at his hands, as if searching for the right words. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and apologetic. "I didn't want it to be like this, Mom," he said. "I never wanted to hurt you, but this is bigger than you and me. This is about accountability. It's about making sure the system works." Elaine's heart broke hearing those words. "So, you're willing to destroy me in the name of accountability? You're willing to tear apart everything I've built just because it's convenient for your career?" Noah looked pained, but he didn't answer. Elaine could see the guilt in his eyes, but it was clear that he still believed in what he was doing. "You've been so blinded by your own sense of justice that you can't see what you're doing to me," Elaine continued, her voice trembling. "You've betrayed me in the worst possible way, Noah. You've chosen the system over your own mother." There was a long silence between them, a silence that spoke volumes. For the first time in weeks, Elaine could see the cracks in Noah's armor. He was struggling, torn between his duty and his love for her. Finally, Noah spoke, his voice quieter now, as though he were admitting something he had been avoiding. "I don't know what to do anymore, Mom. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now I don't know if I can keep going down this path." Elaine didn't know what to say. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and yet she knew that this conversation, this confrontation, was necessary. She needed to make him understand the gravity of what was happening. The truth, the whole truth, had to come out. The heart of the matter. The atmosphere in the room was thick with the weight of unspoken words. Noah's hesitation lingered in the air, filling the space between them like a vast chasm. Elaine could see the internal battle raging inside him. The son she had raised, the one who had always been so sure of himself, was now lost in the whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She could almost feel his pain, as if his guilt was a tangible force that threatened to crush him. But it wasn't just guilt. There was fear, too. Fear of disappointing her, fear of making the wrong decision, fear of becoming a pawn in a game far bigger than either of them. Elaine's heart softened just a little, but the bitterness remained. How could he have come this far? How could he have turned on her? The truth was, he hadn't made this decision alone. There were others, people who had whispered in his ear, told him that what he was doing was for the greater good, but those people weren't his mother, and Elaine had spent her life teaching him what it meant to stand for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. This question mark, this wasn't right. I spent my entire life building trust with my patients, Elaine said quietly, her voice steady but filled with quiet anguish. I've never once put myself above them. I've never once taken shortcuts. My whole career, my whole life, everything I've worked for, it's all been about helping people, and now you want to take that from me? Noah's face tightened at her words, but he didn't respond. He couldn't. Elaine could see it in his eyes, the battle he was waging inside himself. Was this truly justice, or was it just a convenient excuse for his career ambitions? She wanted to ask him that, but she knew the answer would only hurt more. Is this about your job, Noah? Elaine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Is this really about some high-minded pursuit of justice, or is it just about climbing higher in the legal world? Because, if I'm being honest, I don't see any other reason why you would side with them over me. Noah flinched at her words, the truth of them stinging like a slap. His face twisted with frustration, and for a moment Elaine thought he might lash out, but he didn't. Instead, he lowered his head and let out a long, weary sigh. I didn't want to hurt you, Mom, Noah said finally, but I can't ignore what's happening in the medical field. There's corruption, there's greed, people are dying because of incompetence and malpractice. I had to be a part of making it right. Elaine nodded slowly, the pain settling deeper into her bones. She knew what he was saying was true. She had seen it herself, but it didn't excuse what he was doing to her. The system was broken, yes, but that didn't mean she was part of the problem. So, you're willing to sacrifice everything we've built, everything we've been through, for a system that has failed so many? What about me, Noah? Elaine's voice cracked, but she quickly regained control. What about the mother who raised you, who gave up everything to make sure you had a future? Noah stared at her, his face a mixture of confusion and sorrow. He was torn, and it was killing Elaine to see him like this. She had spent so much of her life teaching him to stand up for what was right, and now it seemed like he was willing to sacrifice everything he had ever believed in for the sake of a career. And for what? For a case that would destroy her? Why, Noah? Elaine's voice was softer now, almost pleading. Why didn't you come to me first? Why didn't you trust me to handle this? Noah remained silent for a long time. Elaine could see the weight of his decision crushing him, but she couldn't bring herself to feel sorry for him. Not yet. Not after everything she had been through. She had spent her whole life protecting him, and now he was doing this to her. The betrayal cut deeper than she could have ever imagined. Finally, Noah spoke again, but his voice was barely a whisper. I didn't know what else to do. I thought I was helping. I thought I was doing the right thing. Elaine shook her head slowly, her heart heavy. You weren't helping me, Noah. You were helping them. You were helping the system that's broken, the system that has no regard for people like me. The breaking point, for what seemed like an eternity, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was suffocating, as though the walls of the room were closing in. Elaine had never felt so disconnected from her son, and yet she knew that something had to change. Something had to give. The longer they sat in silence, the further they drifted from the bond they once shared. It was as if the distance between them had become an insurmountable chasm. Elaine stood up abruptly, unable to stay seated any longer. She walked over to the window and stared out at the night sky. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but all she could see was the growing darkness in her life. She had raised Noah to be a man of integrity, but now he was standing on the opposite side of everything she had ever believed in. "How did we get here?" Elaine asked, her voice trembling. "How did I lose you?" Noah's footsteps followed her across the room, and he stopped just behind her, his presence a reminder of everything she had lost. "Mom, I don't want to lose you, but I don't know how to make this right. I don't know how to fix what's happened." Elaine turned to face him, her eyes filled with sorrow and regret. She could see the pain in his eyes, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo the damage that had been done. "You already have," Elaine whispered. "You just need to let go. Let go of this investigation, Noah. It's not worth it. I'm not worth losing your mother over." Noah's face contorted with anguish as he struggled to speak. "I don't know if I can, Mom. I don't know if I can let go." Elaine reached out, her hand shaking as she placed it gently on his shoulder. "You're still my son, Noah, and you're still my hope. Don't let this be the thing that destroys us." For a moment, Noah stood there, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Then, with a slow, agonizing motion, he stepped back and nodded. "I'll do what I can, Mom," he said quietly. "I'll do what I can to fix this." But Elaine wasn't sure if the damage had already been done. The distance between them felt too vast to bridge, and she wondered if they could ever truly recover from this betrayal. But one thing was certain, she wasn't going down without a fight. Elaine's resolve. Elaine sat down at her desk later that night, her mind racing with the new resolve she had found. She had never been a quitter, and she wasn't about to start now. She had a life's worth of experience to draw on, and she was going to use every ounce of it to fight back. She would not let this investigation, this betrayal, define her. She would fight for her career, her reputation, and for the son she still loved, even if it felt like he was slipping away from her. As she began to make a plan, her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. Noah stood there, hesitating, his expression torn, but this time he didn't look like the man who had walked away from her so many times before. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly, stepping into the room. "I've been thinking about everything. I don't know if I can fix this, but I'm going to try. I'll help you fight." Elaine looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of everything that had transpired. She didn't know if she could ever fully forgive him, but she knew one thing. This wasn't over yet. The climax. Unraveling the truth. The investigation had become a public spectacle. The press had caught wind of it, and soon Elaine's name was on every news outlet. Headlines screamed about medical malpractice, corruption in the healthcare system, and doctors under investigation. Every day, Elaine woke up to the sting of yet another news article or report casting doubt on her life's work, her reputation, her career. Everything she had built was crumbling before her eyes, and she had to watch it happen helplessly. As Elaine sat in her office, sorting through piles of legal documents, a part of her felt numb. She had never imagined her own son would be one of the people responsible for bringing her down. But there was no escaping the reality of it. Noah had turned into someone she barely recognized. The son who had once looked up to her as a role model was now pushing for her to lose everything she had worked so hard for. In the midst of all this chaos, Elaine kept working. She wasn't just going to sit idly by and let her career slip through her fingers. If Noah was going to continue his crusade against her, she would have to fight back with everything she had. She began to meticulously review the evidence that had been presented against her, combing through each accusation with a sharp eye. The deeper she dug, the more she realized something wasn't adding up. There were discrepancies in the investigation. Medical records had been tampered with, and the supposed victims of her alleged malpractice were not all they appeared to be. She started asking herself, who was behind this? Who stood to gain from her downfall? Then it hit her. One of the key figures behind the investigation was a competitor in the medical field, Dr. Mark Swanson, a renowned surgeon who had always been jealous of Elaine's success. He had been trying to undermine her for years, planting seeds of doubt whenever he could. This wasn't just about justice. This was about eliminating the competition. Elaine's heart sank as she put the pieces together. Swanson had orchestrated the entire thing, using his connections to manipulate the investigation and make it appear legitimate. And Noah, her own flesh and blood, had been drawn into it, unknowingly playing right into Swanson's hands. The confrontation. Elaine knew she had to confront Noah. The truth couldn't stay hidden any longer, and if she didn't do something now, she might lose everything, her career, her reputation, and her son. She called him, her voice shaky as she asked him to meet her at her office. When Noah arrived, he looked exhausted. The strain of the past few weeks had taken its toll on him. He was still in the same suit he had worn for the past few days, his tie crooked and his face drawn. But when he saw Elaine sitting behind her desk, her eyes filled with determination, something in him shifted. "What is it, Mom?" Noah asked, his voice tired but guarded. "I found something," Elaine said, her voice steady despite the emotion swirling inside her. "Something that proves I'm not the one who's been corrupt." Noah narrowed his eyes, clearly confused. "What are you talking about?" "I've been looking through the evidence, Noah," Elaine continued, "and I found inconsistencies. The records, the testimonies, there's something off about them. And I know who's behind this. It's Dr. Mark Swanson. He's the one who's been trying to destroy me for years. He's the one pulling the strings behind this whole investigation." Noah shook his head, disbelief in his eyes. "What are you saying? Dr. Swanson? He's a respected doctor. He wouldn't—" "No, Noah," Elaine interrupted, her voice firm. "He's been jealous of my success for a long time. He's been trying to ruin me, and now he's using you to do it." There was a long silence. Noah stared at her, his mind clearly racing as he processed her words. For a moment, it seemed as though he might dismiss her claims, but then something in his eyes changed. His expression softened, and Elaine saw the flicker of realization in his gaze. "No," Noah said slowly, his voice trembling. "No, this can't be true. I trusted him. I don't know what to think anymore." Elaine stood up and walked over to him, placing her hands gently on his shoulders. "You don't have to trust him, Noah. You need to trust me. You need to see what's really going on here." Noah's eyes welled with tears, and he stepped back, shaking his head. "How did we get here, Mom? How did we get to this point where I'm fighting you?" Elaine's heart broke at the sight of her son torn between duty and love. "I don't know, Noah, but we can fix this. Together. I know you're not a bad person. I know you've been caught up in something bigger than both of us, but you have to make a choice now. Do you want to keep fighting against me, or do you want to help me clear my name?" There was a long pause as Noah stood there, struggling with the weight of his choices. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he nodded. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'll help you. I'll do everything I can to fix this." Elaine felt a wave of relief wash over her, Though it wasn't enough to heal the wounds that had already been inflicted, the journey ahead would be difficult, and there was still much to be done. But for the first time in weeks, Elaine felt like they were on the same side again. The fight for justice. With Noah on her side, Elaine gathered a team of legal experts and medical professionals to help her fight back against the false accusations. They worked tirelessly, digging through evidence, gathering testimonies, and uncovering the truth behind the conspiracy. It wasn't easy. The legal system was a labyrinth of red tape, and Swanson had powerful allies who were willing to go to great lengths to protect him. But Elaine was no stranger to hard work. She had spent years fighting for her patients, and now she was fighting for herself and her family. With Noah's help, they uncovered the key piece of evidence that exposed Swanson's role in the entire ordeal, a series of email exchanges between him and several of the key witnesses who had accused Elaine of malpractice. The emails outlined a plan to bring Elaine down, and they were the smoking gun they needed to expose Swanson's scheme. The legal team worked quickly to file a motion to dismiss the charges, and soon the investigation that had threatened to ruin Elaine's career came to an end. The charges were dropped, and her medical license was reinstated, but the real victory came when Elaine stood in front of a judge and exposed the truth, putting an end to Swanson's reign of manipulation. But even as the legal battle ended, the emotional scars remained. The damage had been done, and though the truth had come to light, it had cost Elaine more than she could have ever imagined. Her relationship with Noah had been strained to its breaking point, and it would take time, perhaps even years, before they could truly heal. Noah's redemption. In the aftermath, Noah did everything he could to rebuild the trust between him and Elaine. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when it felt like they might never be able to return to the way things had been. But Noah had learned a hard lesson. The truth had a way of revealing itself no matter how much you tried to bury it, and for Elaine, the journey was far from over. She had won the battle, but the war, her fight for redemption, for the truth, for her son, would continue for as long as she had breath in her body. She had faced the deepest betrayal imaginable, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Redemption and reconciliation. The aftermath of the battle. After the legal battle had concluded, life slowly began to settle back into a semblance of normality, but for Elaine, it was anything but. She had been through a whirlwind of emotions: betrayal, fear, hope, and, finally, victory. Her medical license had been reinstated, but the scars from the war she had fought, not just against her own son but against the system itself, ran deep. Despite the resolution of the investigation, the emotional toll weighed heavily on her. Every time she walked into her office, the walls seemed to whisper echoes of the past few months. The bright white coat of a respected doctor was now tainted with the fear of a long-fought battle, the scars of which weren't visible to the public eye but were deeply embedded within her heart. Her reputation had been smeared, even though the truth had ultimately prevailed. Many still whispered, and though she had regained her professional standing, the cracks in her personal life were far from healed. For weeks, Elaine buried herself in work. The clinic was as busy as ever, the patients filing in and out, needing care, compassion, and expertise, which Elaine continued to give with grace. She clung to the one constant in her life, the very work that had been the foundation of her identity for decades. But Noah was ever present in her thoughts. She couldn't shake the memory of how the last few months had unfolded, how the son she had raised, the boy she had loved with all her heart, had betrayed her in the most public and painful way imaginable. And now, despite the court ruling in her favor, she had to ask herself, could she ever forgive him? Noah's struggle. Noah, too, was going through a difficult time. His work as a lawyer had been his identity, just as medicine had been Elaine's. But as he had worked tirelessly to bring down the woman he had once idolized, something had shifted within him. The guilt gnawed at him day and night. He had once believed that he was doing the right thing, serving justice, exposing the flaws in the system, but now, with the truth exposed, he was left with nothing but a wrecked relationship and the regret of his actions. His relationship with his colleagues had been strained as well. Many of them had sided with Elaine, some even questioning Noah's involvement in the case. They had seen the person he had become, the relentless lawyer who seemed to care more about his career than the people in his life. And yet, deep down, Noah knew that was never truly who he was. The person he had been, the person he could still be, was someone who was driven by a sense of justice and love for his family, not by ambition or career-driven motives. Noah tried to reach out to his mother multiple times after the trial. He sent her messages, left voicemails, but they all went unanswered. He respected her need for space, but could feel the painful distance growing between them. He understood that the betrayal he had inflicted on her was not something that could be erased in a few conversations or gestures of apology. It would take time, and most importantly, it would take trust, something he had broken and could not expect to rebuild overnight. One evening, after another failed attempt to reach Elaine, Noah decided to visit her. He wasn't sure if she would even let him in, but he knew he had to try. He had to face her, to explain himself, to show her that he was ready to make amends. The longer he waited, the more the guilt ate away at him, and he realized he couldn't live with the idea that his mother would never forgive him. The meeting. Elaine was in her living room, sitting by the window, a book in her lap, but she wasn't reading. The soft evening light illuminated her face, but her eyes were distant. She could feel the weight of the silence in her home, the emptiness, the loneliness. Her eyes flicked toward the door as she heard the familiar sound of footsteps on the porch. When she opened the door, there he was, Noah, standing in front of her, looking every bit like the son she had raised, but with eyes that were filled with regret and sadness. "I had to see you," Noah said, his voice breaking. "I know it's been a long time. I know I've hurt you, and I can't take that back. But I need you to know how sorry I am, Mom." Elaine stood in the doorway, unsure of what to say. She had wanted this moment, this reconciliation, but now that it was here, the words seemed to be lost. For so long, she had carried the pain of his betrayal, the knowledge that her own son had been one of the people trying to destroy her career, and it felt like a betrayal she might never recover from. "I don't know where to begin," Elaine said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "I wanted to believe in you, Noah. I wanted to trust you, but you—" She paused, struggling to find the right words. "You almost destroyed everything. Everything I've worked for, everything I've fought for." Noah nodded, guilt flooding his chest. "I know, and I wish I could take it back. I wish I could change what I did, but I can't. All I can do now is try to make things right. I want to help you. I want to fix what I've broken." Elaine looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in months, she saw the son she had raised, the boy with a good heart who had always wanted to do the right thing, but had been so consumed by his desire to succeed that he had lost his way. She saw the man who was now standing before her, broken, regretful, but still her son. "You don't have to fix everything, Noah," Elaine said, her voice softening. "You just need to be honest with yourself, and you need to understand what you've done. I can't promise that everything will go back to the way it was, but we can try. We can rebuild, one step at a time." Noah nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes, Mom. I just want you to know that I love you and I'm sorry." The road to reconciliation, the road to healing was not easy. There were days when the wounds of betrayal felt too fresh, and nights when Elaine lay awake, wondering if their relationship could ever truly be repaired. But with time, the cracks began to mend. Slowly, they started communicating more openly, and Noah began to make amends, not just with Elaine, but with everyone he had hurt in the process. Elaine, too, started to heal. It wasn't just about her career anymore. It was about rebuilding trust with the people she loved, and especially with Noah. She had learned that no matter how strong she was, she couldn't control everything. Sometimes, the best thing she could do was to allow herself to forgive, not just for Noah's sake, but for her own peace of mind. In the months that followed, Noah took on more responsibility in his legal career, focusing less on fame and more on justice. He became involved in cases that aligned with his values, representing clients who had been wronged by the system. He spent time with Elaine, not just as a son, but as a man who was learning what it truly meant to honor his mother. And through it all, their relationship deepened. It was no longer about what had been taken from them, but about what they could rebuild together. A new beginning. A year later, at a family dinner, Noah raised his glass to toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice steady, his eyes filled with gratitude. "To second chances, and to family." Elaine smiled, her heart full. "To second chances," she echoed, raising her glass. They had come a long way, and though there was still much to repair, the first step toward healing had been taken. They had faced the darkest moments of their lives and emerged stronger on the other side. In the end, it wasn't just about the battle for Elaine's medical license or the fight for justice. It was about the battle for their relationship, for their family, and for the love that, despite everything, had never truly disappeared.